The village was quiet, nestled between towering trees and thick forests that whispered secrets to the wind. It was a place where life moved slowly, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. In a small, crumbling hut at the edge of the village lived a young girl named Khamiida. Her world had been painted with shades of sorrow ever since she lost her mother, who had been the only light in her life. Her mother's warmth still lingered in Khamiida's memories, and on lonely nights, she would sit by the tiny window of the hut, clutching the worn scarf her mother used to wear, whispering prayers for strength. Khamiida was known throughout the village for her innocence and diligence. While other children played in the fields, she would fetch water from the well or gather firewood in the forest. Her eyes, deep and filled with quiet resilience, held the reflection of someone far older than her years. She never complained about the endless chores or the harsh words of her stepmother, Zahraani. Zahraani had moved into Khamiida's life after her father remarried in a desperate attempt to provide his daughter with care. But fate had other plans. Shortly after the marriage, he passed away, leaving Khamiida at the mercy of her stepmother. Zahraani was a woman consumed by greed and envy. Her heart twisted with malice every time she looked at Khamiida, whose natural beauty and virtue seemed to mock her own bitterness. Zahraani had a daughter of her own, Aniva, who was as vain and spoiled as her mother. Zahraani poured all her love and resources into Aniva, leaving Khamiida to fend for herself. The girl was given the most meager scraps to eat and the hardest task to perform. Zahraani's cruelty wasn't limited to words. Her plans were far more insidious, aimed at ensuring Khamiida never had a moment of joy or a chance to rise above her circumstances. One day, as Khamiida was sweeping the dusty yard, Zahraani sat on a rickety chair, her eyes narrowing as she watched the girl work. Zahraani's mind churned with thoughts of how to rid herself of Khamiida once and for all. She couldn't bear the idea of Khamiida outshining Aniva, especially as rumors began circulating in the village about Prince Tavareen's search for a bride. The prince was said to be kind-hearted and noble, a ruler who walked among his people and sought a queen with both beauty and wisdom. Zahraani's ambitions burned brightly. She was determined to present Aniva as the perfect match for the prince. But Khamiida's presence was a threat she couldn't ignore. The prince, Tavareen, was indeed all that the villagers whispered about and more. Though he lived in the grandeur of the royal palace, his heart longed for a connection beyond titles and wealth. He often disguised himself as a commoner and ventured into the villages, learning about the lives of his people. On one such journey, fate was preparing to weave his path with that of Khamiida, setting into motion events that neither could foresee. For now, Khamiida remained unaware of the twists that lay ahead, her only focus on surviving another day under Zahraani's oppressive rule. The forests around her whispered stories of change, but she was too tired, too burdened to listen. In the silence of her little hut, Khamiida clung to her mother's memory, finding solace in the thought that perhaps, someday, her struggles would mean something. But Zahraani's mind was already plotting, and the path Khamiida was about to walk would test every ounce of her strength and spirit. Zahraani's hatred for Khamiida burned brighter with each passing day. It wasn't just the girl's beauty that gnawed at her, although that was reason enough, but also the quiet grace with which Khamiida carried herself. While Aniva flaunted her mother's affection with an air of entitlement, Khamiida's humility only seemed to amplify her charm. Zahraani couldn't bear to see her daughter overshadowed by someone she considered insignificant, a girl she believed should remain in the shadows of servitude. Every time Zahraani looked at Aniva, with her extravagance and haughty demeanor, she felt an overwhelming urge to remove Khamiida from their lives entirely. Sitting in the corner of her small, cluttered kitchen, Zahraani devised a plan. The village was rife with tales of a rare mythical flower said to bring immense fortune to anyone who possessed it. The flower, known as the Nyahira bloom, was rumored to grow in the treacherous depths of a stream hidden within the forest. No one dared venture there, for the stream was said to be cursed, guarded by spirits that punished the greedy and unwelcome. Zahraani, of course, didn't believe in the tales. but she saw an opportunity in the story. She called for Khamiida that evening, her voice sharp and commanding. The girl rushed in, wiping her hands on the hem of her worn dress. Zahraani's expression softened into a mask of false concern, though her eyes betrayed her cold intentions. "Khamiida," she began, her tone syrupy and insincere, "I've been thinking about how hard you work. Perhaps it is time I gave you a task that could truly benefit this household. There is a flower, the Nyahira bloom, that grows near the stream deep in the forest. It is said to bring great fortune to those who find it. If you bring it back to us, it could change our lives forever." Khamiida's heart fluttered at the thought. Was this finally her chance to win Zahraani's approval? The idea of making her stepmother proud filled her with hope. "I'll find it," Khamiida said with quiet determination, unaware of the danger that awaited her. Zahraani nodded, hiding a smirk behind her veil of kindness. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Zahraani handed Khamiida a small basket and sent her on her way. "Be careful," she said with mock concern. "The path is difficult, but I have faith in you." Anivar watched from the doorway, her lips curled in a sneer. To her, Khamiida was nothing more than an obstacle to her own aspirations, and she secretly hoped the forest would rid them of her for good. Khamiida set off on the journey with a mix of fear and determination. The forest loomed ahead, its thick canopy shrouding the path in a greenish haze. She clutched the basket tightly, her mother's scarf tied around her neck like a talisman. As she walked deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the village faded into silence. The stream was said to be several miles away, hidden among the densest part of the forest. The journey was arduous. Twigs snapped underfoot, and the rustling of leaves seemed to echo her every step. Khamiida paused occasionally to catch her breath, her eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of the elusive flower. She remembered the stories the villagers used to tell about the spirits that guarded the stream, but she pushed the thoughts aside. She had no choice but to trust her instincts and believe that she would find the Nyahira bloom. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, the sunlight barely penetrating the thick foliage. Khamiida began to feel the weight of exhaustion, but she pressed on. The path became more treacherous, with jagged rocks and tangled roots threatening to trip her at every turn. Still, she held on to the hope that this journey would finally earn her stepmother's love and approval. Finally, she heard it, the soft gurgling of water. Relief washed over her as she approached the stream, its surface shimmering like liquid glass under the faint sunlight that managed to pierce through the canopy. The air was eerily still, and a strange, otherworldly silence enveloped the area. Khamiida hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the stream's edge, searching for the mythical flower. The Nyahira bloom, if it truly existed, was said to glow faintly, its petals a vibrant mix of gold and crimson. Khamiida knelt by the water's edge, her eyes darting across the moss-covered rocks and reeds. She reached out to touch the cool water, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of peace. But that peace was short-lived. The forest seemed to shift around her, the silence growing heavier, almost oppressive. The stream, once serene, now seemed to ripple with an unnatural energy. Khamiida tried to shake off the unease, convincing herself it was just her imagination. She spotted a faint glimmer further down the stream and quickly made her way toward it, her footsteps careful and deliberate. As she approached the glowing object, her breath caught in her throat. There it was, the Nyahira bloom, nestled between two rocks, its petals glowing softly as if lit from within. Khamiida reached out to pluck the flower, but the moment her fingers brushed its delicate petals, the air around her seemed to shift again. The wind picked up, rustling the trees with an almost mournful wail. Khamiida froze, her heart racing. She clutched the flower tightly, refusing to let go. "I have to do this," she whispered to herself, "for my family, for Zahraani." She turned to leave. But as she stepped away from the stream, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The journey back to the village would be even more perilous, and Khamiida had no idea what awaited her in the shadows of the forest. Unbeknownst to her, Zahraani sat in the comfort of her home, confident that her plan would work. She couldn't imagine Khamiida surviving the journey, let alone returning with the mythical flower. For Zahraani, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one without Khamiida to stand in the way of Anivar's future. But fate had a way of weaving its threads in unexpected ways, and Khamiida's story, Khamiida stumbled through the dense forest, her heart a mixture of exhaustion and hope, as the soft gurgle of flowing water grew louder. She had finally reached the stream. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Clear, shimmering water snaking its way through a lush, verdant canopy of trees. The air felt different here, almost magical, as if the stream itself were alive, holding secrets that only the brave could uncover. Pausing at the edge of the water, Khamiida dropped her basket and knelt, cupping her hands to splash the cool water on her face. The long journey had left her weary, but the enchanting surroundings gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She scanned the stream's edge, her gaze darting over mossy rocks and clusters of reeds, searching for the legendary Nyahira bloom. Her stepmother's harsh words echoed in her mind, driving her forward despite the ache in her limbs. As she moved along the water's edge, her bare feet brushing against smooth stones, she became acutely aware of the silence around her. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds and rustling leaves, seemed muted, as if the stream held its breath, watching her every move. Khamiida pushed aside her unease, her eyes fixed on her task. Unbeknownst to her, a figure had been watching her from the shadows of the trees. Prince Tavareen, dressed in the plain garments of a common traveller, stood by his horse, intrigued by the young woman at the stream. He had ventured into the forest to escape the confines of royal life, seeking solace in nature and a moment away from the pressures of court. But now his attention was completely captured by this girl, who moved with a quiet determination that seemed at odds with her delicate frame. Tavareen stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. Khamiida heard the sound and turned sharply, her eyes widening as she saw the stranger approaching. She clutched her basket tightly, unsure of his intentions. "I didn't mean to startle you," Tavareen said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Are you lost?" Khamiida shook her head, her gaze dropping to the ground. "No, I'm not lost," she replied softly. "I'm looking for something." Tavareen tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. "May I ask what you're searching for? Perhaps I can help." Khamiida hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But there was something about his demeanour, kind, unassuming, and completely different from the harshness she was used to at home, that made her feel at ease. "I'm looking for the Nyahira bloom," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's said to grow near this stream." Tavareen raised an eyebrow, recognizing the name from the old stories his grandmother used to tell. "The Nyahira bloom," he repeated. "That's a rare flower, almost mythical. Why would you risk coming all the way here to find it?" Khamiida hesitated again, her fingers tightening around the basket handle. She didn't want to reveal the true reason, the cruelty of her stepmother, and the desperate hope that this task might finally earn her approval. Instead, she said, "It's important for my family. If I find it, it could change everything." Tavareen nodded, sensing that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He studied her for a moment, noticing the worn fabric of her dress and the determined set of her jaw. Despite her modest appearance, there was a quiet strength in her that intrigued him. "Well," he said with a small smile, "if it's that important, then I'd be glad to help you look." Khamiida blinked in surprise. She wasn't used to kindness, especially from strangers. "You don't have to," she said quickly, unsure how to react. "I want to," Tavareen replied simply, his smile growing. Two pairs of eyes are better than one, don't you think? Reluctantly, Khamiida nodded, and the two began their search together. Tavareen moved with practiced ease, his experience as a traveller evident in the way he navigated the uneven terrain. Khamiida, though hesitant at first, soon found herself relaxing in his company. As they searched, Tavareen asked her questions about her life, drawing her out of her shell. Khamiida spoke hesitantly at first, but his genuine interest made it easier for her to open up. She told him about her village, her late mother, and the struggles she faced living under Zahraani's roof. Though she avoided mentioning her stepmother by name, Tavareen picked up on the pain in her voice and the weight of the unspoken words. "You've been through so much," Tavareen said softly as they paused near a cluster of rocks. "But you're stronger than you realize, Khamiida. Not many would take on such a dangerous task with the hope of helping their family." His words stirred something in Khamiida, an unfamiliar feeling of being seen and valued. She glanced at him, noticing for the first time the way his eyes held a depth of understanding that made her feel less alone. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure how to express the gratitude swelling in her chest. They continued their search, and as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Tavareen suddenly stopped. "There," he said, pointing to a small patch of glowing petals peeking out from beneath a bush. Khamiida followed his gaze, her breath catching as she saw the Nyahera bloom. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined, its golden and crimson petals shimmering in the fading light. Together, they carefully approached the flower. Khamiida knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached for it. "It's real," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I didn't think I'd actually find it." Tavareen watched her with a smile, feeling a strange sense of pride in her accomplishment. "You did it," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You've achieved something many wouldn't even dare to attempt." As Khamiida gently placed the flower in her basket, she looked up at Tavareen, her heart brimming with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she said earnestly. Tavareen shook his head. "You had the courage to come here in the first place. That's what matters." For the first time in a long while, Khamiida felt a glimmer of hope. Tavareen's presence had turned what could have been a terrifying journey into an experience she would never forget. As they began the trek back through the forest, Tavareen looked at her thoughtfully. "I know you came here for your family," he said, "but I can't help but feel you deserve more than what you've been given." Khamiida didn't know how to respond, so she stayed quiet. Tavareen continued, his tone more serious. "If you're willing, I'd like you to come with me. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Khamiida stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening. "Who?" Tavareen smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Let's just say it's someone who might change your life." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the forest, Tavareen led Khamiida toward a path that opened to a sight she had never imagined. In the distance, the royal palace stood tall and resplendent, its spires glinting in the fading light. Khamiida's steps faltered as she took in the grandeur, a mixture of awe and unease bubbling within her. She'd never dreamed of stepping foot in such a place, and now, here she was, standing on its threshold. Tavareen glanced back at her, a reassuring smile on his face. "It's just a place, Khamiida," he said gently, sensing her hesitation. "The people inside are what truly matter." His words gave her a small measure of comfort, and she followed him across the grand courtyard, her heart pounding with every step. Inside, the palace buzzed with life. Courtiers, dressed in fine silks and adorned with glittering jewels, turned to stare at the pair as they entered. Whispers rippled through the halls as the prince, disguised no more, led the simple village girl through the opulent corridors. Khamiida felt their eyes on her, judging, questioning, and yet she held her head high. Tavareen's presence beside her was a shield, and his confidence in her gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. Servants hurried to accommodate the prince's unexpected guest, and within hours, Khamiida found herself transformed in ways she could hardly recognize. Her worn, patched dress was replaced with soft, flowing fabrics in vibrant colors that brought out the natural warmth of her skin. Her hair, once hastily tied back, now cascaded down her shoulders, braided with delicate gold threads. She looked into the polished mirror in her chambers and barely recognized the girl staring back. Despite the finery, Khamiida's humility and kindness remained unshaken. She thanked each servant who attended to her with genuine gratitude, a stark contrast to the haughty demands they were used to from others. Word of the new girl's grace and warmth spread quickly, and soon even the most skeptical courtiers found themselves charmed by her demeanor. Khamiida didn't try to impress anyone. She simply treated them with the same respect and kindness she had always shown, and in doing so, she won their hearts. Back in the village, Zahraani was seething. News of Khamiida's arrival at the palace reached her ears like a dagger to the chest. She could barely believe it. Her plan to rid herself of the girl had not only failed but had backfired spectacularly. Khamiida was now in the favor of the prince himself. Zahraani's jealousy burned brighter than ever, fueled by the fear that Khamiida's rise would overshadow her own daughter, Anivar. Zahraani wasted no time devising a new scheme. She instructed Anivar to practice every art of charm and elegance, preparing her to present herself as the perfect bride for the prince. "We'll show them that you, my daughter, are the only one worthy of standing by the prince's side," Zahraani hissed, her eyes gleaming with determination. She planned to find a way to discredit Khamiida, to tarnish her reputation in the eyes of the court. This time, Zahraani vowed she would not fail. Meanwhile, Tavareen watched Khamiida with growing admiration. Her kindness extended beyond the courtiers and servants. She took time to listen to the palace guards, the cooks, and even the stable hands. She treated each person she met as an equal, never looking down on anyone despite her sudden change in circumstances. Tavareen saw the way she lit up the lives of those around her, not with material wealth or grand gestures, but with her genuine warmth and compassion. One evening, as the two strolled through the palace gardens, Tavareen found himself unable to hide his feelings any longer. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. "Khamiida," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I've met many people in my life, nobles, scholars, warriors, but none have touched my heart the way you have." Khamiida stopped, her breath catching as she looked up at him. "Your Highness," she started, but he shook his head. "Call me Tavareen," he said with a smile. "And hear me out. You have a strength and goodness that this world desperately needs. You've endured so much, yet you still choose kindness. That's what makes you extraordinary." He paused, searching her eyes. "I believe you have the potential to be so much more than you realize, and He hesitated, then took a step closer. "I find myself drawn to you in ways I cannot ignore." Khamiida's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, overwhelmed by his words. She had never imagined someone like Tavareen, a prince no less, could see her in such a light. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Say you'll stay," Tavareen said softly. "Let me show you what life can be like when you're surrounded by people who truly care for you." Khamiida met his gaze, and in that moment, she saw not a prince, but a man who genuinely valued her for who she was. Her heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and a tentative hope she hadn't felt in years. "I'll stay," she said finally, her voice steady, "but only if I can continue to be myself." Tavareen's smile widened and he nodded. "That's all I would ever ask." As the days passed, Khamiida's presence in the palace became even more profound. She offered practical solutions to the concerns of the common folk, drawing on her own experiences of hardship. Tavareen's counselors, initially wary of her, began to see her as a valuable voice of reason and compassion. Tavareen's affection for her grew stronger, and with each passing day, he became more certain that Khamiida was the one he had been searching for, not just as a queen, but as a partner who would stand by his side through all of life's trials. But Zahraani was not done. She arrived at the palace with Anivar, her plan in full motion. She would stop at nothing to tear Khamiida down and secure her daughter's place beside the prince. Zahraani's schemes were only beginning, and the path ahead for Khamiida was fraught with challenges she could not yet foresee. The grand hall of the palace was alive with tension as Zahraani and Anivar swept in, their presence cloaked in an air of practiced grace and false humility. Zahraani wore a triumphant smirk, confident in her plan to discredit Khamiida and secure her daughter's position as the prince's bride. The courtiers, curious and skeptical, whispered among themselves as Zahraani approached Prince Tavareen, bowing deeply before speaking. "Your Highness," Zahraani began, her voice smooth and honeyed, "I have come to reveal a grave matter. It concerns the girl you've welcomed into your palace." She cast a disdainful glance at Khamiida, who stood silently at the side, her head held high despite the venomous accusations she could feel brewing. Tavareen's expression remained calm, though his eyes darkened with suspicion. "Speak your mind, Zahraani," he said evenly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. Zahraani straightened, her voice growing louder for all to hear. "This girl, Khamiida, has deceived you. She is no innocent villager, but a thief who has taken advantage of your kindness. And worse, she seeks to usurp the place that rightfully belongs to my daughter, Anivar." At the mention of her name, Anivar stepped forward, her face a picture of calculated innocence. Dressed in a gown of shimmering gold, she curtsied demurely, playing the part of a virtuous maiden. "I only wish to serve my prince and kingdom," she said softly, her eyes casting fleeting glances at Tavareen. "But I cannot remain silent when injustice threatens to poison your court." The hall erupted in murmurs, and Khamiida felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. She wanted to defend herself, to cry out against the lies, but she knew this was exactly what Zahraani wanted, for her to appear defensive and desperate. Instead, she stood her ground, her silence a quiet testament to her strength. Tavareen raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. His gaze swept over Zahraani, Anivar, and Khamiida, his mind working quickly. He had heard enough tales of palace intrigue to know that the truth often lay hidden beneath layers of deception. "These are serious accusations," he said, his voice measured. "But I am not one to pass judgment without proof." Zahraani's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Your Highness. I am prepared to prove my claims." She motioned to a servant, who brought forward a chest containing items Zahraani claimed Khamiida had stolen. It was a clever ploy, for the items were indeed valuable, and their sudden appearance seemed damning. But Tavareen was not easily swayed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Very well," he said, "but fairness demands that all parties be tested, for character is revealed not through words, but through actions." The hall fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Tavareen's command was final. "I will create a test, one that will reveal the truth. Let us see who is worthy of trust and who is not." The test began the next morning, a series of tasks designed to showcase qualities such as honesty, kindness, and wisdom. The first challenge involved distributing food to the villagers gathered outside the palace gates. Zahraani and Anivar approached the task with thinly veiled disdain, handing out scraps with forced smiles and muttered complaints about the heat and the dirt. Zahraani whispered to her daughter to conserve the finer goods, claiming it was beneath them to waste such luxuries on common folk. In contrast, Khamiida moved among the villagers with genuine warmth, her hands gentle as she shared the food equally, ensuring even the youngest and weakest were fed. She listened to their stories, offering words of encouragement and hope. The villagers, touched by her sincerity, began to murmur their support, their voices carrying back to the palace. The second task was one of honesty. Tavareen presented a jeweled necklace, claiming it had been lost in the palace and offering it to whoever claimed ownership. Anivar's eyes sparkled with greed as she stepped forward, spinning a tale about how the necklace had been hers all along, stolen from her chambers by some nameless thief. Khamiida, however, shook her head. "I have no claim to such a necklace," she said simply. "It does not belong to me, and I will not take what is not mine." Tavareen's expression remained impassive, but inside, his respect for Khamiida deepened. He had planted the necklace as a test, knowing it belonged to no one present. Anivar's eagerness to lie spoke volumes, while Khamiida's integrity shone brightly. The final task was one of wisdom and compassion. Each woman was given a sum of gold and told to use it to solve a problem within the kingdom. Anivar, under Zahraani's guidance, spent the gold on lavish gifts for the court, hoping to win favor among the nobles. But her actions were met with muted disdain, for the court saw through the shallow display. Khamiida, on the other hand, used her gold to repair the village well, which had been dry for weeks, leaving the villagers desperate for water. Her choice not only solved a pressing issue, but also endeared her further to the people, who praised her as a true leader. When the tasks were complete, Tavareen gathered everyone in the grand hall to announce his decision. Zahraani and Anivar stood smugly to one side, convinced that their schemes had succeeded. Khamiida stood apart, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart pounding but her head held high. "Today," Tavareen began, his voice echoing through the hall, "I have seen the true nature of those who stand before me, and I must say, the results are clear." He turned to Zahraani and Anivar, his gaze sharp. "Zahraani, you came here claiming to seek justice, but your actions have revealed your true motives: greed, deceit, and ambition at the expense of others. Anivar, your lack of compassion and dishonesty have no place in this court." Gasps rippled through the room as Tavareen's words cut through the tension. Zahraani's face paled, and Anivar's smug expression crumbled into one of shock. Tavareen's voice grew firmer. "For your actions, you are hereby banished from this palace. You sought to tear down an innocent soul, but instead, you have brought about your own downfall." Zahraani tried to protest, but the guards stepped forward, their presence a silent warning. With no other choice, she and Anivar were led from the hall, their departure a quiet but powerful end to their schemes. Tavareen turned to Khamiida, his gaze softening. "And you, Khamiida, have proven yourself beyond measure. Your kindness, honesty, and wisdom are the qualities of a true queen. You are the light this kingdom needs." Khamiida's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. The hall erupted in applause as Tavareen took her hand, a silent promise passing between them, a promise of a future built on trust, respect, and love. The kingdom was abuzz with joy and excitement as news of the royal engagement spread like wildfire. Khamiida, once a girl who lived under the shadow of cruelty and hardship, was now at the center of a grand celebration. Prince Tavareen had proposed to her in a heartfelt moment that left no room for doubt about his love and admiration for the young woman who had proven herself in ways far beyond the palace walls. The palace transformed into a vision of festivity. Banners in rich hues of gold and crimson adorned the grand halls. Flowers of every color lined the pathways, and the sound of music and laughter filled the air. The villagers were invited to join the celebrations, a testament to Khamiida's connection to the people and Tavareen's desire to make this union a celebration of the entire kingdom. Dressed in a gown of silken white embroidered with gold threads, Khamiida stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. Her life had changed so drastically that it felt like a dream, but the weight of Tavareen's love and the kingdom's acceptance grounded her in this beautiful reality. As she walked down the aisle toward Tavareen, the crowd erupted in cheers, their faces lit with admiration and joy for their new queen-to-be. The ceremony was a masterpiece of unity and love, a blending of traditions that reflected both the humble origins of Khamiida and the grandeur of the royal family. Tavareen placed a crown upon her head, the symbol of her new role as queen, and the hall filled with applause. The vows they exchanged were simple yet profound, a promise to lead with kindness, fairness, and courage. Beyond the palace gates, Zahraani watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows. Stripped of her wealth and status, she was left with only the bitter regret of her actions. She saw the girl she had tried to destroy now shining brighter than she ever could have imagined. For the first time, Zahraani felt the true weight of her greed and cruelty, a burden she would carry for the rest of her days. The loss of Anivar's favour and their place in society was nothing compared to the emptiness that filled her now. She had gambled everything and lost, leaving her with nothing but regret. As the celebrations carried on into the night, Khamiida and Tavareen addressed the kingdom together for the first time. Tavareen spoke of Khamiida's strength, courage, and the lessons she had taught him about love and leadership. Khamiida, in turn, thanked the kingdom for their faith and vowed to serve them with all her heart. Her words resonated deeply with the people, who saw in her a queen who would lead with compassion and wisdom. The story of Khamiida's journey became a tale passed down through generations, a reminder that no matter how dark life may seem, virtue, truth, and resilience will always shine through. And as Khamiida took her place beside Tavareen, the kingdom rejoiced, knowing they were in the hands of a queen whose heart was as pure as her spirit.